My name is Michaela Hawkins. I'm a 50s woman. Yeah, and I'm speaking today as a campaign supporter of Back to 60.
Thanks so much, Michaela Hawkins, Ms. Hawkins, for coming. And I'd just like first to clarify, can you confirm that you have signed the consent form and read the privacy documents and agree for this recording to be used for the purposes of the CEDAW People's Tribunal?
Yes,
CEDAW
I have.
law. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Right, now to the first question. Can you tell us when you knew or what you knew of the notice of deferrals of the State Pension Act, that is the state pension age coming in under the State Pension Act of 1995, and what impact, if any, has this had on you personally?
Well, I only heard by word of mouth 2 years before I was due to retire at 60. I couldn't believe it, to be honest with you. So I got in touch with my branch. And at that time, my branch was male dominated, my branch of Unison. So I got in touch with them and I said, have you heard anything about this? No, not even my branch, you know. So I delved a little bit deeper and I just could not believe it, because obviously, you know, I was really planning to retire at 60 after starting work 2 weeks before my 15th birthday. So I actually started full-time work at 14. So I was really looking forward to retiring at 60. And of course, my husband is 10 years older than myself, and he's not in the best of health. So to think that I would have had to work, you know, a further 6 years was absolutely devastating. You know, my husband, he only has a small occupational pension, plus his state pension. That wouldn't have been enough for us to have any quality of life, you know, if I just finished work. So, of course, I continued work. But I worked in the care sector, you know, and then to have the pandemic, you know, forced to work through the pandemic in care homes, you know, that was putting a lot of strain on myself and obviously on my husband, because he was in, you know, he's in the vulnerable category. So yeah, you know, so to work all my life, expecting, rightly so, to receive my state pension at 60, then finding out on the cusp of my retirement that I got to work an extra 6 years, you know, put all our plans into disarray.
Understood. And you actually mentioned that you're involved in the Back to 60 campaign. Could you just briefly tell us something about the Back to 60 campaign?
Yes, well, it was just such a coincidence, the way that I became involved in the Back to 60 campaign. Because when I was looking more into this deferral on our state pensions, I happened to come across the Back to 60 campaign on social media. And yes, I was like what they were saying, being a trade unionist myself, you know, and very involved within the labour movement. I could see that, yeah, for restitution, because of the way that 50s women were particularly singled out and discriminated against. So yes, I wanted to become involved with the Back to 60 campaign. And that's how I became more and more involved and became more active. Because,
right. Yeah, because I was going to lead on from that by asking, in your experience, what do you actually make of the way in which the government approached these changes? I mean, what's your view of the government action, or we might say inaction, in terms of bringing these changes into effect?
Well, it was really a poorly laid out plan in the way the state pension increases for women was decided. There was no impact assessment with regard to the economic, social, health implications that would affect women. You know, I mean, Alan Johnson, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, until the 2005 election, commented shortly before leaving office on the need for radical reform to tackle the scandal of women's pensions. You know, just 13% of women pensioners were entitled to the full basic pension compared to 92% of men. So the governments knew that women were already discriminated against. You know, they then exacerbated this discrimination for 50s women with a raise in state pension increases on the pretense of equality. So by not giving adequate or no notice of these raises when on the cusp of retirement, you know, was all wrong. And I mean, notice of these changes could have, in my opinion, been easily done. For example, either through payroll or your national insurance records at the time. So there was, you know, there was no excuse not to inform these women in 1995.
That their age at which they would qualify for the state pension would be raised ultimately to 65. Good. Well, are you aware of any actions that could have been taken in Parliament to ensure that women were alerted to this change? Any parliamentary action that could have been taken?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, no changes to the state pension age should have been considered, you know, until the problem of discrimination was dealt with. You know, we've had the gender pay gap, gender work gap, gender pension gaps, and all this was very prevalent for 50s women. So the government should have addressed the disparities in the pension entitlements before they equalised the state pension age. You know, equality in outcome should have been met, not just equality of age.
Right, thank you. And just to the current situation, Mr. Johnson, as the Prime Minister, made a statement about the issue when he became Prime Minister. Are you able to advise what statement he made at that time and what impact that statement had or effect, if any?
Well, on July the 12th in 2019, before Johnson was appointed as Prime Minister, you know, he stated, if he enters number 10, he will commit to doing everything possible I can to sorting out the issues of 1950s women. And crucially said he was not convinced about the cost of helping these women because they are not necessarily true. And then on the steps of number 10, after being elected as Prime Minister, he stated, I will undertake to return to this issue with fresh vigour and new eyes and see what I can do to sort it out. Well, as we know, there have been nothing.
No.
So promises, yeah.
Right.
You know, I just see a promise is a debt of honour that haven't been paid.
Precisely. Yes, just as the debt, one might say, that exists in relation to the women that you referred to, who are doing work at a terrifically high level and at a very low rate of pay. So are you aware of any proceedings that have been taken in court on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, as an active supporter and campaigner for Back to 60, I followed the court proceedings, you know, very carefully. You know, I mean, there was great joy amongst all groups of 50s women when on the 30th of November 2018, the Right Honourable Miss Justice Lang gave Back to 60 claimants permission to bring a judicial review against the DWP over the raising of the state pension age. I mean, for 3.8 million women born in the 1950s. And this was, the decision was made, you know, that we had the case on all grounds. The ruling meant that the legal team led by Michael Mansfield QC had the right to argue the case that the government's decision, which affected this particular group of women, was both a matter of gender and age discrimination. I mean, on the 5th of June then, 2019, Back to 60 went to the High Court for the judicial review. But you know, Lord Justice Irwin and Mrs. Justice Whipple dismissed the claim, stating the issue raised by the claimants about whether the choices were right or wrong, or good or bad, were not for the court. They were for the members of the public and their elected representatives. Now, an appeal to go to the Supreme Court was then denied on being out of time. This reasoning was based on a paper-thin refusal, as stated by Michael Mansfield QC. And I wondered, is this a case of Wednesbury unreasonableness? And I mean, this is where the decision is so unreasonable that no reasonable authority could ever come to it.
Yes. Thank you. Also, I'm just wondering if you're aware of any comments or statements that the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women committee, the CEDAW committee, has it actually addressed this issue of the women's pension age being raised in the United Kingdom in this way?
Well, yeah, because of discrimination. I mean, I think it's just general recommendations 27 out of CEDAW about older people and discrimination against older people, you know. And I mean, in a strongly worded report, you know, from CEDAW in Geneva against the government, you know, it recommends that the state party incorporates all the provisions of the convention into its legislation without further delay to ensure that the rights of women are guaranteed systematically and on an equal footing. You know, it also recommends that the state party, in accordance with its obligations under the convention, take proactive measures to ensure that the convention is given effect in all its overseas territories and crown dependencies. You know, I mean, it was a damning criticism, and it comes after 35 years of delays by successive governments to properly implement the convention. You know, the committee's findings, you know, sharply differentiate between the foot-dragging actions of the UK government and the progress that's been promised by the Welsh and Scottish government. Well, devolved assemblies, yeah.
Yes, in referring to the devolved assemblies, my understanding is that you're referring that they are endeavouring to take action in relation to implementation of CEDAW. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
But the problem that have been encountered is that the government have threatened to take Scotland, the devolved assembly in Scotland, to courts to stop them having the autonomy to incorporate CEDAW into the, domestic law for them. So it's a battle of wills between Westminster and the devolved assemblies. But the devolved assemblies are working together to overcome this.
Right. And just returning to the CEDAW committee, have you been involved in work in relation to the CEDAW committee? Have you been involved in writing reports to the CEDAW committee, or in other ways supporting women who go to the CEDAW committee to give reports or alternative reports to the government on the various issues relating to women, and specifically the pensions issue? Yeah,
a lot of my work with this is through my union, Unison. But we have done this. A lot of this is by passing motions through conferences as well, to put the pressure on governments to say, look, these women have been the victim of discrimination in all forms, so this CEDAW must be used, which, of course, for CEDAW being ratified, the government is obligated anyhow to fulfill, the recommendations within CEDAW. And this is where we are trying to put the pressure on, that the government should fulfill their obligations and give full restitution back to 50s women because of the unfair and discriminatory way that they were treated.
And if we think, you've mentioned the ratification, which was 1986, which of course was last century, and some not inconsiderable time ago. We're well on the way to 30 years after the ratification, which provides the obligation that the government has to domesticate CEDAW. So thank you for raising that. Just a couple of more questions, if I may. This, of course, if the 50s women were to be recompensed financially, are you able to say whether, on your estimate, there would be an option for the National Insurance Fund to recompense women so that they are not in the situation that they're in now, with the pension age having been extended without them, as you have said, having notice? So it would mean that there'd have to be a fund available to recompense. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's funny that women always have a price on their heads. but besides, I mean, Guy Opperman quoted a figure of 77 billion for full restitution of 1950s women state pension. I mean, I would argue that in fact it would cost nothing. We paid into the National Insurance Fund along with our employer on the understanding that we would receive our state pension at 60. I mean, there was an investigation by the investigative journalist David Henke, who discovered 271 billion was lost because successive governments from 1980 to 2014 had taken the decision not to top up the National Insurance Fund under the tripartite agreement, whereby employee, employer, and the government would contribute into the National Insurance Fund. I mean, this would pay more than 3 times over the money that's owed to 50s women. I mean, George Osborne, a former Chancellor, stated that he saved £500 billion by escalating and accelerating the state pension age for women. I mean, rubbing salt in the wound again by saying the easiest savings he'd made. So, yeah, the costs do not stack up. It's an excuse. That's all it is an excuse to divert away from actually giving 50s women the justice they deserve, which is full restitution.
Right. Well, let's just go to the position. We've been looking at women and the pension age. Is there anything that's occurred in terms of men's pensions over this period, say 1995 up to the present, that you're able to pinpoint? What's the position with men's pensions?
Yeah, well, in 1983, the then Chancellor, Geoffrey Howe, encouraged men to get off the dole to keep unemployment figures down. He subsidised 9.8 million men over 60 their national insurance contributions using auto credits towards getting full state pension. But between 1983 and 2018, this was kept quiet by the DWP. Surprise, surprise. And they only revealed when a 1950s woman got the admission from a Freedom of Information request from the ministry. I mean, this disclosure was particularly galling because women were promised they would have their NI contributions paid between 2010 and 2018, only to have that offer withdrawn a year before it was due to start. So a number of these women had to pay thousands of pounds to make up the shortfall for full pension. You know, and so many could not afford that. Yet the DWP claimed that men were discriminated against, not women, because of the state pension ages. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Just a couple of final questions. Ms. Hawkins, Michaela, could you explain what action, if any, you've taken in relation to the APPG, and explain what the APPG is and what action you've taken in relation to them? Thank you.
Yeah, the APPG is an all-parliamentary group, a cross-party group of MPs looking at the discrimination against 50s women. You know, I attended meetings where a government spokesperson from the original APPG was addressing 1950s women. It was explained in these meetings that the APPG would be pushing for a bridging payment of £74 per week for women aged 64. Then when they reach retirement age, they would have a reduced pension for life. You know, yeah. Obviously, I challenged this, saying that was in effect alone, which would further exacerbate the situation of all 50s women. You know, this spokesperson also rejected out of hand any support for back to 60 and full restitution. You know, that was completely and totally unacceptable. After the general election, the new parliament seen a complete revamp of the APPG, with Andrew Gwynn, Labour MP chair, and Peter Aldis, Conservative MP, as co-chair, where Peter Aldis stated, you know, the issue of state pension inequality for women is something that runs across party lines. No political party is blameless, and it's time to step in and sort this issue once and for all. So, yeah, the only way the issue can be sorted once and for all, and to be fair and consistent for all 50s women, is for full restitution. You know, and Andrew Gwynn said, you know, we represent 1950s women and continue the fight for a fair resolution to an injustice that have gone on for far too long. So yeah, so like I say, you know, you can only right an injustice by doing the right thing. You know, piecemeal offerings are not justice. It is what it says, piecemeal. So yeah, full restitution is the only solution.
Good, thank you. Just a follow-up question on that. If there is this all-party parliamentary group that's understanding of the issue and appears to be supportive of the importance of the 50s women's pension rights, what would you say is the impediment to it? I mean, why isn't the parliament acting and the government acting?
Because it's all getting, it's smoke and mirrors with costs. Right? Also, you know, this is a fact. Women are not valued. Right? So they see women of less value. They can take the money away from us, but to return that money, you know, seems a heck of a problem for government, you know, and I mean, I'm talking about all governments. I mean, as I said previously, you know, they've all admitted that women are discriminated against with state pensions. You know, still are. So I cannot understand the APPG, right, that is disseminating into pieces what what women, 1950s women, deserve. I mean, we deserve the whole loaf, not crumbs, right? And full restitution, like I said, is the only solution. And this is where pressure, putting pressure on the APPG to recognise this.
Right. And are there any further just comments that you'd like to make to the tribunal, before the tribunal, on this particular issue of the women's pension rights, and we might add wrongs? Yeah,
no, like I say, it's women have suffered still suffering the inequalities right throughout their working lives. And, you know, we shouldn't be further penalised because we are women. We have worked hard to build up our communities, for society, for our families. You know, we should never, ever be penalised just because we are women.
Could I just actually, sorry, but ask you one last question? Now, you may or may not be able to answer this one, but you see, the Equal Pay Act came in 1970, and yet we heard from the witnessed immediately before you and from you that women's pay rates are low and that they don't equate with the level of work women do. That when women are doing so-called women's work, that is caring in the care industry, as they call it, teaching assistants, librarianship, one might add, cleaning, and so on, that if those jobs are not being properly recognised for the value of the work that is incorporated in those jobs, what purpose then has or what impact has the 1970s Equal Pay Act actually had? And of course, it's incorporated into the 2010 Equality Act as well. And yet we're still saying there's a gender pay gap, which, as the previous witness indicated, as you do, has led to a pensions gap on top of this issue of the age differential. So are you able to say as a unionist, whether that act had any impact at all?
No, it have never had any impact whatsoever. I mean, we live in a gendered society from the day we were born, right? I mean, 43% gender pension gap. Research have found that this more negatively impacts like on single women, non-white women, working class women. You know, employers are found to pay the minimum contributions in women's dominated sectors. You know, it's women in these sectors, right, I'll go back, right? The four biggest employers in this country, right, is the NHS, it's the care sector, it's education, and it's retail. Predominantly, women work in these sectors. 84% work in the NHS, 84%, perhaps higher, in care. These workers are women. Education, 73% who work in education are women. Right? Retail is 72% that work in retail. Four biggest employers, yet are paid the lowest wages. Many of them women work part-time. They cannot accumulate or contribute into a pension pot the same as men. So the pension gap will actually get wider and wider and wider and not narrow. So until this is seriously addressed about how women are discriminated against because their work is seen as less value and yet contributes more to the well-being of the people in this country and society as a whole than any other job. You know, so until that is addressed and CEDAW addresses these issues, right, then the pay gap and the pension gap is going to get wider and wider and not narrower.
And impact even more on the poverty of women that you've described and that the previous witness alluded to as well.
Yeah, because I mean, poverty has a woman's face, you know, and when they go on about child poverty, no, it's women's poverty that causes child poverty. So even with that, even with campaigns against child poverty, if you like, they are taking out women. They're not saying women's poverty, they are saying child poverty.
Understand.
Yeah. So address women's poverty, you will address child poverty. So
thank you. Yes, thank you. And that's a point extremely well made. It also fits in with a notion that arose not a long time ago, within the last couple of decades, where there's been this notion that somehow this is new, that there are poor children and poor women, that women are in poverty and children are in poverty. It's not new. It's actually historical. But I'd like to say thank you so much for attending at the tribunal, Ms. Hawkins, Michaela, and thank you for your evidence.